Some of the conversations you might have missed.
It's a memorandum of understanding. If it doesn't get done in 60 days, that's all right. We go back to bombing. You know, I don't want to do that because it's so good. But we might have to, because we're never going to let them have a nuclear weapon. But they've agreed not to, and you'll see that very clearly in the agreement.
A couple of things, Willie, that bear repeating for the uninitiated, and certainly for some people that are listening to what Donald Trump's saying right now, that, oh, they've agreed not to have a nuclear weapon. This is the same position they have had for 50 years. This is the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and everybody else will tell you it is the same exact position that they've had for 50 years. Secondly, why would Iran not take this deal? This memorandum of understanding, as David Rode is reporting, and we'll talk to him about it in a second, and everybody else is reporting, this is a dream. They can't believe they got what they got from Donald Trump. And just a couple of things from the Wall Street Journal editorial page. Iran will demand even more, the Wall Street Journal editorial page says this morning. And if Mr. Trump is as desperate to end the conflict as he has sounded lately, he's going to give it. He sounds desperate. He sounds like he's going to do anything to end this conflict. The people of Israel feel betrayed this morning. Republicans are horrified. Some will say it out loud. Some will not. And you could just go down the list of all the things he said we were going to do at the beginning of this war, and it just hasn't been done. And this MOU takes us in the opposite direction, showering them with maybe $500 billion of money up front. If you add all the things up that the Wall Street Journal was talking about yesterday. And then beyond that, they get to rebuild their economy and act as if they're Luxembourg, as if they're not the epicenter of international terrorism, because Donald Trump says they can.
Yeah, that Wall Street Journal catalogs that op-ed catalogs president by president from Jimmy Carter forward all the attempts by both Democrats and Republicans over the years to find the moderates in Iran and finally say, we're going to be the administration that engages with Iran. They're going to act like a normal country, which is the term now that Vice President J.D. Vance is using. He says, if Iran acts like a normal country, this will be a good deal for everyone. Well, history tells us that the mullahs have no interest in Iran being a normal country. They have an agenda that they're pushing around the world. So, David Rode, I mean, you look at the particulars of all this. Sanctions lifted, oil flowing out of Iran already. Some of those ships are already moving. They can get those tens of billions of dollars back. The $300 billion investment fund. We had the president of the United States, we'll dig into this a little bit later, saying, well, I've got to let them keep some missiles. It's not fair. Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states have missiles. We got to keep the playing field even, which whether you're Republican or Democrat, made people's heads explode. But he called in the early days of this war for unconditional surrender of Iran. He called for regime change. He said they could not have a nuclear weapon. Is any of that achieved in this memorandum of understanding?
No, not in any way, shape, or form. It's essentially an agreement to reopen the Strait of Hormuz on Iran's terms. Iran will be able, there's some language in there that they basically can't charge this toll that they've talked about for so long. This gives them immense power. Trump said if they don't, go along with the negotiations the way we want, we're going to start bombing them again. What will they do if we start bombing them? Close the Strait of Hormuz. And the bombing didn't work, and we'll talk about this tomorrow. I'll keep it short, but I would like to speak this morning at some point. President Trump is the person most responsible for this strategic defeat and failure, but I would argue the person second most responsible, who's in the most dangerous position politically, is Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. He repeatedly lied to the American public in his press conferences about the progress of the war, and he also refused to give basic information to members of Congress. There's a lot of ill will among senators and House members towards Pete Hegseth. And I have our notes. Jonathan and I covered this, the press conferences every day, and it's just astonishing. The U.S. was raining death, fire, and fury onto the Iranians. This is not endless. This is not mission creep, mocking former presidents and administrations. The aftermath of this is going to be in our interest, and most importantly, he said Iran is exercising sheer desperation in the Strait of Hormuz. Did he warn the president about the Strait of Hormuz before this war? Was he honest with the American public? And to the 50,000 Americans who risked their lives and the 13 soldiers who died, his performance is just something that has to be looked at.
And interesting, Joe, we haven't seen the defense secretary in public much since those podium banging news briefings that he would give every week where he'd lecture the media about how to cover the war, what was actually happening. And from all the reporting that he would show the President of the United States an iPad with things blowing up to show that they were doing well. It turns out this is a much, much more complicated problem than can be solved by blowing things up.
Well, showing him an iPad with things blowing up, putting out memes from Hollywood movies or cartoons, and that was supposed to substitute as basically communications coming out of the Pentagon or out of the White House about how this war, all of it ended up being a lie. I mean, we have looked back at the lies told by the Pentagon during the Vietnam War with William Westmoreland, and of course that came over years. But the damage that over the past several months that has put us where we are this morning, where Iran is going to be a behemoth in the region. With this money, with this MOU, if we do follow through on this MOU, Iran will be more powerful than they've ever been. The Iranians know it and are jubilant about this victory that they've achieved, and they're calling it what it is for them, a victory. The Saudis yesterday, who were compared to Iran, I'm sure they love that, where Donald Trump says, well, of course Iran needs to have ballistic missiles. I mean, if Saudi Arabia has ballistic missiles, how the hell can I tell Iran they can't have ballistic missiles? Really? Well, because just about a month or two ago, it was Pete Hegseth telling us that all the ballistic missiles had been destroyed. They're giving us numbers, we've killed 70% are gone, 80% gone, 90%. We have reduced it to crush. And Donald Trump telling reporters and anybody else who would listen that they don't love America, that they're rooting against the troops. If we admit that the Iranians still have ballistic missile capability, now he's admitting it. They're all admitting it. And Jonathan Lemire, Donald Trump has a much bigger problem than with lefties in the progressive caucus in the House and the Senate. He's got problems with his own Republicans. He's got problems with conservatives. He's got, for good reason, problems with the Wall Street Journal editorial page. And he's got problems inside his own administration from people who rightly see this as a betrayal. And those who see this as a betrayal have actually read history. And they understand what the Wall Street Journal is trying to say. And I've got to say, I don't know who taught J.D. Vance at some of the nation's best institutions, right? But they need to get their diplomas back, because we learned from Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan that he was pushing for the Insurrection Act before a lawyer inside the White House had to tell the Yale Law School graduate, no, we can't do that. And he's like, oh, okay. And now he's going around talking about Iran like it's a normal country. Well, as if they're Luxembourg. And as the Wall Street Journal editorial pages said again, as Willie said, they take us through every president since 1979 that has tried to find the moderates. We've always joked throughout the war about trying to find the moderates in Iran and how there are not those moderates in Iran who get to power, or else they get killed. And so J.D. Vance keeps talking about the moderates in Iran, and the Wall Street Journal rightly says every president that has given Iran a good deal, thinking that they were going to get the moderates to move forward in Iran, what's happened? Well, what's happened is Iran has used the money to invest in terrorism, to invest in spreading global terrorism across the region and across the world. And it's happened for 47 years. And now that they see a weak president who is scared to continue this fight, in their eyes, they understand they can get whatever they want.
The latest example of this administration not knowing its history, even a small one. President Trump signed the Memorandum of Understanding last night at Versailles. I don't know. Treaties signed at Versailles have not tended to work out well, over the last 100 years or so. And you're right. There's no one who actually likes this deal.
President Trump telling Axios yesterday there are, quote, no limits to. Mark Caputo joins us with more from his sit-down with the president's first interview since signing the agreement that extends the ceasefire with Iran. Here's part of that conversation.
What have you learned about not just the exercise of power, but the limits on your power as a result of the conflict?
There are no limits.
No limit.
No, not. I haven't learned that lesson yet. I know there are, but there are no limits. We defeated them totally militarily. Who else could have done a blockade like that? I did a naval blockade where not one ship was able to get through. Some tried. They didn't. It didn't last very long.
And it certainly brought Iran to the table more than before. However, beginning a conflict, you had talked about you only wanted unconditional surrender. And the MOU doesn't look like unconditional surrender.
Well, it really probably is unconditional surrender.
And White House reporter for Axios, Mark Caputo himself, joins us now. Mark, good morning. So take us inside that conversation with the president. There's a lot, even just in that one clip we played there. This is not unconditional surrender for Iran, obviously, but what stood out to you?
What stood out for me is the guy didn't really sleep. The president hadn't slept much. I think maybe 2 hours. He had flown back from Europe. But his general attitude was very positive, despite all of the negative commentary and pushback over the deal. The president seems pretty relieved because he has an exit here. And he's looking at two things. He's looking at the stock market and he's looking at the price of oil. And the price of oil is down. And at one point in the interview, he said it, or at a few points in the interview, he said that. At one point, he said, it's a gusher, as if he literally struck oil through this deal because of the price lowering. And that really impressed me because it just shows what Trump is really focused on. Yeah.
Mark, you talked also about, a whole range of things. You had half an hour, I think, with the president. You spoke about regime change. You also spoke about his relationship with Netanyahu. We heard J.D. Vance earlier being very critical of the Israeli government, surprisingly so for an American vice president. How was the president when you asked him about his relationship at the moment with Netanyahu? I
specifically asked him that, and he said, Bibi, we're good. He said, but we've got to keep him, and he sort of paused for a second, sane. And I said, well, how do you control Israel from attacking Lebanon and possibly sort of starting to wreck the ceasefire of this deal? And he says, they're going to do what I say. And they listened to me. And it was just a very kind of clear statement from Trump that he thinks he has so much influence over there because of not just his relationship with Netanyahu, but also I think Israel's standing in the world, as Vance indicated, that he has this sort of ability. Now, whether or not Netanyahu is going to go along with it, who knows? We reported a little while ago at Axios that very hot phone call that Trump had with Netanyahu, when Netanyahu attacked Lebanon at a certain point, and the Iranians started to pull out of negotiations and caused all the Sturm und Drang. So it's less of a close relationship now than it was heading into the war.
He spent the last few days in Europe as the details of the MOU started to come out. And we report on the program the number of Republican senators, Cassidy, Cotton, Wicker, who have now come out pretty critical about the deal. Do you think, and you say that the president sounded genuinely positive about what he had achieved, do you think now that he comes back and he turns on Fox News and he's sitting in the residence and he's watching television and he sees the criticism even coming from Fox News, that that's going to change his mind about this deal, or that it's going to make it harder for him to defend it? Woe betide him who predicts what Donald Trump is going to do. Nevertheless, I would find it difficult to believe that he would change that much. My general view of Trump is that if you criticize something that he has started to put his chips in, he doesn't like the criticism. I asked him during the interview, are you going to punish any of the Republicans who oppose you on this? Because there are elements of the deal with sanctions that are going to need to come back to Congress for sort of a final approval, in part to set up or make effective this $300 billion reconstruction fund. And it took me a little while to get the president to answer, but he said basically no. Now, I'm wondering if that'll change. That is, if the criticism reaches a fever pitch from his own party, does he start to really push back and start to target people? I don't know that.
So, Mark, congrats on the interview. Obviously, it's yet another example of President Trump trying to assert his own reality, right? Living in denial, I'd argue, about some of the outcomes here in Iran. But he can read the polls, and certainly other members of the Republican Party can, and they see how unpopular this war was and currently how unpopular he and the GOP is. So, is there any recognition, not from Trump himself personally, but aides you've talked to, just about what a bind they're in? Is there any sort of concern as to what this meant for November?
If you scratch a few layers beneath the surface, yeah, you'll hear that, but there certainly is going to be nothing on the record or even on background. But you can tell that what was just really concerning them is not just the poll numbers, but what was causing the underlying poll number troubles, and that was the price of gas. And my guess here, having talked to them over the past few months about the war, is that the argument they're going to make is, look, everyone was complaining about gas prices. Well, gas prices are coming back down, and therefore what the president is proposing is a good idea. And that might be a challenging argument for his opponents and his critics to push back on. Just realize the American people don't really pay a lot of attention to the finer points of foreign policy and these various points of the MOU. They're focused on their lives, and they're driving around, and every day there's been a scoreboard on street corners that people have seen, and that's the price of fuel. Even if you drive a Tesla, you at least can see what the price of fuel is doing, and it's been up, and people don't like it. And now it's going to come down, and the president's hope is as a result of that coming down, the fortunes of Republicans increase. That is, if they take yes for an answer, his version of yes, and embrace this deal.
And to save our planet, the policy must include, and my experience as Attorney General reinforced that for me, the policies must include accountability and consequence for bad behaviors.
That was former Vice President Ayers alongside Arnold Schwarzenegger at the Austrian World Summit. The summit is celebrating its 10th anniversary this year, with climate leaders from several countries taking the stage to discuss and offer solutions now to fight climate change by bringing together governments, businesses, and individuals. And this year's theme is We Are Unstoppable. And Arnold Schwarzenegger joins us now from Vienna. He is, of course, the host of the summit. Governor, thank you so much for being with us. We greatly appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And, I just want to, right off the top, correct you, because you said it's climate change. I want you to talk about fighting pollution, because we have to terminate pollution. And that's what I always say. I use my movie lines, hasta la vista, pollution. So this is the kind of things we have to talk about. Climate change, most people don't understand, and they don't care about any of that stuff. I think they care about pollution, because pollution is the thing that actually kills 7 million people a year. Climate change, and with all the bad weathers and the storms and the floods and all of this stuff, that kills maybe 25,000 people, which is, of course, 25,000 people too many. But pollution kills 7 million. So this is why I always stress pollution rather than climate change.
And what are some of the ideas right now that you're hearing this year that you're getting excited about in some ways to fight pollution?
Well, what the theme of the conference is that we are unstoppable. And the reason why it is because, as you know, in America, we have an administration that doesn't really believe in pollution being a threat to our health, and that it kills all of these people. So we want to encourage people here to just say, stop whining about the White House and about them not believing in them. I said, what is it that we can do? I said, because it doesn't really matter in the end who is in the White House. What really matters is what we're doing on a state and local level. I said, we have to rely on ourselves. That's where the action is. And so when you think about, what California has accomplished and what Texas is accomplishing right now and what Massachusetts is accomplishing and Minnesota and all of those states, it's really remarkable, because they just say, okay, we're going to take the bull by the horn and we're going to go and create the changes, and we're going to set goals of upping our renewable energy, lowering our greenhouse gases and all those kind of things. Let's not wait for the federal government to take the lead. Let us take the lead. So what we are doing is, with this conference here, is really encouraging people to go and to just continue working themselves and think about what can I do versus what can they do.
That's such an important message. I wanted to ask you, you've said some very inspiring things about American democracy. And I've always found that immigrants have a better perspective sometimes than those of us who were born in America and were raised here, because we just assume that democracy is always going to be with us. We always assume that everything will always be the way it is. You've given some very moving warnings in the past about your own family members that were swept up during World War II in Nazism. And you've warned Americans against this. I'm wondering, as you look at what's happening with Gavin Newsom and his wife, as you look at what's happening where people are trying to say that California's elections are being rigged. You're the last Republican governor elected in California, and it took 30 days. That's the law. How are we doing as a democracy right now? What are your concerns with somebody who has a perspective that maybe those of us who were born here don't have?
Well, it doesn't really matter where you live. The most important thing is that we are inclusive and that we don't hate anybody because they feel differently than we do, or that belong to a different religion than we do, or that they're belonging to a different party than we do. And this is the theme also of our conference here. To me, it makes no difference if you're a communist, if you're a socialist, if you're a Democrat or a Republican, or if you come from a dictatorship. It makes no difference. I say, come here to Vienna and let's work together to solve this problem and to create a good environment. I think that if we work together, we are much more powerful rather than fighting each other and always alienating half of the people. So to me, I think going in the direction of kind of like inclusion has always been something that I was taught by people here in Austria. And then when I came to America, I saw inclusion really in the highest level, where people were kind of like really helpful to me as an immigrant that just arrived in America. They gave me pillowcases and pillows and blankets and dishes and silverware and the black and white TV and all of this kind of things. I was shocked when I came to America and I got this much help. And I learned how to be generous. And I do exactly the same thing now. I want to make sure that when it is Thanksgiving, that I go to East LA and to feed the people that have less money. And then I donate 1,000 turkeys to them on Thanksgiving. I do exactly the things that was done to me when I came to America. And I want to continue that tradition. And, since in all the other stuff, I'm just if it's bodybuilding, if it's fitness, I deal with the world. So I never ask when I promote bodybuilding or when I promote fitness, are you a Democrat? Are you an Arab? Are you Israeli? Are you Australian? Are you from Africa? I don't care. I don't care. I want everyone to be fit. I want everyone to enjoy the motivation when I say go and train and do something every day. It doesn't matter what party you're coming from or if you believe in the things that I believe in. I want to have everyone be included. And so this is, I think, when we work on inclusion, I think that we will go and protect our democracy much more.
Very different things happening with immigrants today here in America, that is for sure. Host of the Austrian World Summit, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Thank you very much for joining us on Morning Joe. It was good to have you on the show this morning.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Much more still ahead on Morning Joe Weekend. Stay with us. With your latest piece for the Financial Times, which is titled, "This time, Trump and Netanyahu have really fallen out." And in it, you write in part, quote, "Netanyahu sold Trump and his own public on the idea that after 47 years, Iran's theocrats were finally meeting their Waterloo. Rarely has a geopolitical roll of the dice gone so rapidly wrong. The Israeli leader thus faces an unpalatable choice. Either he submits to a deal that leaves Iran considerably stronger than it was before February 28th, or he breaks with the U.S. by trying to scupper the deal. The America First camp will be primed to praise whatever deal Trump strikes, even if it's less good than Obama's, which Netanyahu also did his best to scupper. From their point of view, Trump's flirtation with Middle Eastern forever wars is over. He is back to the president they thought they knew. Netanyahu is often called Israel's Houdini, Even he, however, will find this vice hard to escape. Should he try to jeopardize the Iran talks, Trump's reaction could be worse than mouthing off to a reporter. And Ed, how bad could it get?
Well, so part of this draft MOU is unconsulted with Israel, but part of it is that Israel withdraws from Lebanon. That is how the Iranians understand it. And that is something that the Israelis are not prepared to do. It's very unclear whether Iran has full control over Hezbollah, but if Hezbollah continues to fire rockets at Israel, Israel has said it will respond and it will not withdraw from Lebanon. So if you take that as read, this will immediately jeopardize the deal. But I think the sort of bigger picture here is that Netanyahu's life's work is getting rid of the Iranian regime. And he thought on February 28th that he was now on the cusp of realizing his life's work. And you heard the language, from Trump talking about the people rising up, the regime being changed, unconditional surrender, and all the kinds of things that were music to Netanyahu's ears. Trump is now saying that the Iranians are very rational, they're very reasonable people, that Israel should stop sort of targeting apartment blocks in Beirut, that it should it should ideally outsource the battle with Hezbollah to the leader of Syria, because Israel can't be trusted. Of course, he said those things that he said to Axios about Netanyahu. It's a family show, so I won't repeat what he said. I was talking last night to David Ignatius at an event, and we agreed that we had never heard an American president talk in that way about a leader of an allied, of a friendly nation, as Trump did about Netanyahu. So this is a political death sentence for Netanyahu, and therefore we'll see what he does over the next 60 days, whether he tries to undermine this deal. But Trump's made it very clear that he's going to get this deal with Israel's support or not. And, the potential for a U.S.-Israeli breach should not be underrated.
David, as Ed says, Prime Minister Netanyahu thought at long last he had found the president who was going to help him wipe out Iran. Its military capability, its nuclear program, take out the regime, all of those things. You go back to that reporting from the New York Times inside the Situation Room, where Prime Minister Netanyahu came and explicitly made the case to Donald Trump and convinced him to launch the war in Iran. And now here we are all these months later, where you have a memorandum of understanding and talks that from Iran's side need to include Israel pulling away from Lebanon. And Israel says we can't do that as long as Hezbollah is striking us from there. So not only did Netanyahu not get what he wanted out of this war, he may have to retreat because of the agreement that Donald Trump appears to be ready to sign.
Yeah, if this unfolds the way it appears to be unfolding, this isn't just it's a defeat for America. It's a potential disaster for Israel, because if you look at the larger context here, Israel burned a lot of its relationships with a lot of countries in the world over the last couple of years, but it has absolutely wrapped both arms around the Trump administration. It has thrown all the dice in with the Trump administration. And if you have a rift here, if the end result here is not only pulling in Hezbollah into the deal, making Hezbollah a beneficiary of the deal, but also creating a degree or maybe even entire rupture with the Trump administration, then all of a sudden Israel is going to be in a situation where it is going to look into the world and see fewer and fewer friends, and its most powerful friend is now deeply uncertain in its relationships with the country. So obviously we're thinking first and foremost about the impact of this deal on the United States. But if you put on the hat of analyzing this from the standpoint of Israel's best interests, not only do you not totally destroy the nuclear program, not only do you not completely destroy the Iranian missile program, not only do you not end its support for proxies, you've actually brought one of its proxies in, the worst one, the most dangerous one in, as a potential beneficiary. This is a disastrous for Israel.
What Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin is saying about the prospect of having ICE agents at polling locations during the midterms. Morning Joe will be right back.